and good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? My name is David Hutchinson. I'm with the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget. Thanks for coming out tonight. It should be a very fun night. Of course, we've got some housekeeping issues. First, I want to say thank you to Council President Bruce Krause for coming through tonight. Really appreciate it. It's always great to... Oh, I'm sorry. Did I lose a little? Let me try again. Thanks to Council President Bruce Krause for coming out tonight. It's always great to be out in the community for these kind of events. Always a very good champion of the capital budget, too, I have to say. Also, there should be a budget on every table. Looks like this. Feel free to leaf through it. You can get a sense of how we've been allocating things for 2019. Also, there should be a moderator at every table. That's going to be a human being. So for moderators, if you can just raise your hands. You want to make sure that everybody's at a table with a moderator. They are these amazing volunteers who are going to guide you through this practice that's really, really important for us forming next year's capital budget. So thank you to the moderators. Also, I need to extend a huge thank you to Nina Esposito and Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers for letting us use this beautiful space. When we do tours for potential venues, we make sure that we go through our checklist, that it's near a bus line, that there's parking, that it's climate controlled. One of the things we kind of forgot that we brought up on the way out was we also need a space for childcare. Nina, without missing a beat, said, "Oh, we have a coat closet," and started to walk us through a coat closet. Molly and I kind of had a moment of like, is this really happening this way? And in Price is Right fashion, at least in my memory, said that we converted into a childcare room. So we really could not be in a better space for this style of meeting. So thanks again to Pittsburgh Federation of Teachers and Nina Esposito. Most importantly, I want to say thank you to all of you for coming out tonight. This is a great opportunity to talk about the 2020 capital budgets. We have two of these forums. We had one on Thursday that was in the north side. Tonight we're in the south. And it's a great opportunity for you to not only learn about the capital budget, but also learn how your neighbors interact with infrastructure. It's also a great chance for us to get your input so that we are creating a capital budget that is responsive to the needs of our citizens. So to accomplish these three goals, we're going to be using a deliberative democracy format for tonight's meeting. It's a participatory approach that uses small group discussions, questions to an expert panel to help you better understand both the city's goals and the capital budget process, and to get the best feedback possible from all of you. So let's get started. Tonight's agenda you can check out on page 1 of your briefing packet. There's some other great information in there. We're going to try and stick along with that so you have a reference for yourself as we go. We're going to do a short introduction on what the capital budget is. We're also going to have the breakout sessions that are really crucial where you get to talk to your table mates about infrastructure. And then at the end, we're going to have an expert panel Q&A. So one of the things we really want to stress is this meeting is about your input to create outputs for us so that we can better understand how we need to put together the capital budget. A big part of that is going to be a survey that you're going to complete before you leave tonight, right? Everybody's going to do a survey? I'll make you a deal. I'll trade you a cookie for a survey. At the end, we're holding the cookies in an undisclosed location. You will get a cookie when we get to survey time. And those surveys are really important. As you can see in the next slide and also in your packet, I go through each one of the surveys. I tag each of the responses for the project type. Sometimes there's a larger initiative, like a PWSA issue that's not even in the capital budget, but I still tag it so that I can share it with PWSA. We also tag council districts if you give us a specific location for an idea or an issue. And then we share the results. We create a guide that helps the departments and the council offices understand where to find the feedback, so we can go through and tag everything that we need to. And then I create a short guide that hopefully makes things easy for the council offices and the departments to find the references that are relevant to them. So in this instance, if you worked on ADA compliance in last year's packet, you know you can look at pages 1, 14, 23, etc. to find all the specific references. So what you write in those surveys will be shared and seen by people who need to see it. So you may be wondering, what is the capital budget? You can also reference the table tents. They're kind of a good quick guide. We identified some points of confusion in the past, or just some general questions people had, and we tried to identify kind of what is and is not in the capital budget. But also, it's important to keep in mind that we have two budgets in the city. We have the operating budget that deals with salaries, pension obligations, office supplies, employee health care, that kind of stuff. And then we have the capital budget, which is focused mostly on physical infrastructure. A lot of it's about the built environment, things like streets, sidewalks, parks, playgrounds, pools, ball fields, all the physical stuff that we interact with. It's also important to keep in mind that some projects can take multiple years, millions of dollars, multiple contracts. So to make sure that we're accounting for everything correctly, we actually build what's called a capital improvement program, which is a 6-year outlook for how we intend to spend capital budget funds. For us, it's really important to have these series of 6-year plans. The individual projects themselves all build up into the actual capital improvement plan. In terms of the schedule, we're really in the heat of it with the capital budget development for 2020. In April, the mayor provides priorities to the department directors that help them guide what their capital budget proposals should be for the next year. In May, our office issues a request for proposals. In June, we have our 2 public hearings, and July 1st is when all of the proposals are due. Throughout July and August, members of the Capital Budget Program Facilitation Committee, which includes members of OMB, includes Bill Urbanik from Council's Budget Office. It also includes a member of the Controller's Office. We review and score the proposals. It really does take a couple months. This year, I think we have 25 meetings scheduled with all of the departments to really get into the nitty-gritty details of the proposal, to figure out what's not on the page that we need to know about. And then we rank all of the proposals according to some criteria that's reflected in your handout, and also that we can get into in a little bit. So for 2020, the mayor has a number of proposals. Keep in mind that these are in no particular order, but they are really meant to express the values of the mayor and the administration and what department directors should be centering their proposals on. For us this year, we've had a really great kind of I don't call it a synergy because it's very intentional, but a great partnership between both the administration and council in terms of equity. I think we understand the ways in which we have maybe let people down in the past in delivering services, and we're on the right track now to make sure that we're getting better with delivering things equitably across all of our neighborhoods. Also, we want to make sure that we're giving people safe, affordable, sustainable housing, that we're addressing climate change the best we can, green infrastructure, and that we're creating good public space. So like I said, page 4 of your packet has the criteria for how capital budget proposals are scored. Once departments and city council have submitted proposals, again, it's evaluated by that subset of the Capital Program Facilitation Committee, including members of the Office of Management and Budget, City Council Budget Office, and the City Controller. We are going to score against these criterias, and then I end up taking each individual scores and sort them from highest to lowest. I apply the funding constraints for that year based on the amount of bond funds that we have, or the pay-as-you-go transfer we get from the operating budget. And I kind of make a mock budget for each one of the people scoring. If you look at the very back of the budget, for this year new, we actually had a full list of every proposal that we received and how many of the scorers had that in their kind of mock budget. For us, that was a great transparency initiative this year. We wanted to make sure people understand how we're scoring things, and also get a chance to see all of the individual projects. Once the projects are ranked, the mayor and city council receive those rankings. They're able to take them into consideration, and then the mayor introduces the preliminary budget in September. So support for the public is one of the, you see on the second from the bottom, is one of the criteria that we score on, and information from tonight is going to go into that. We're going to have a summary of the data from this meeting and Thursday's meeting, and when we get proposals related to sidewalks and we see a big amount of feedback from the public in support of sidewalks, we know that that project then has public support. So now's the fun part. We're actually going to break into small group discussions with your tables. There's going to be 3 questions we want you to address. Your moderators are going to help you through them. I'm going to jump back on the microphone every 15 minutes or so just to give you a nudge on to the next question. Also keep in mind that we're going to have the expert panel at the conclusion of those 3 questions at your table. So if something comes up that's confusing or really relevant that you might want to ask the expert panel, write it down. And then when it gets time to do that, you'll have something in your back pocket. I would plan on having 2 questions at least. We can definitely get everybody in for 1. We might have time for 2. But now, moderators, take it away. From the sound of it, we're having some great discussions. We're not getting sucked into a food coma, so congratulations on that. Also, our panel tonight, very, very good. We had a couple changes, so there may be some different names from the list that's in your packet due to sick kids and other externalities with life, but we have all those departments plus some bonus people. So we have Grant Gitlin from the Mayor's Office, Director Gable from Department of Public Works, Assistant Director Jeff Scalacan from the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. We have Council's Budget Office Director Bill Urbanik, Andrew DeWitt with the Controller's Office, Ray Gastel, the Director of City Planning, Jessica Smith-Perry, who is a champion of affordable housing with the URA. Emily Mitchell works on a lot of really big projects, major development projects for the URA, and we have Ross Chapman from City Parks as well. So tonight we're going to start off with Table 9.
Okay, hi. So our first question is for basically everybody, and it's within your own office, how do you guys create some sort of neighborhood representation so that you know what people in the communities are thinking about?
So I think that's actually a great question for Director Gastel. In terms of the neighborhood planners, they actually split up geographically. And so those neighborhood planners oftentimes team up with our OCA team and go out to public meetings to discuss really pressing issues on sometimes a monthly basis, sometimes more frequently. Sometimes there's also pop-ups for special issues. Director Gastel, would you like to speak more on that?
Yeah. As Dave was saying, that we have neighborhood planners who work both on a kind of project basis sometimes, but also on neighborhood plans. We've got about 5 of them really in process right now. And so in that way, they work very directly with neighbors, learning what their priorities are because they're working with them on a neighborhood plan. But it can also be a very specific project. It could be an open space issue. It could be a challenge to in a neighborhood commercial district that or it could be a specific project which is kind of at a certain scale and is going through the planning process, but we make sure if there's a kind of really critical issue that we'll have a meeting and learn more about it. Also, as you already know, we are fortunate that in addition to the work that we do of being out there and being at meetings, and it could be parking permits, I mean any number of things, or public arts, a lot of different topics. But in addition to the kind of meetings that we have like that are purpose-oriented, we're fortunate, we try to get at least some range on just sort of the regularly scheduled meetings. And then we also fortunately have the community affairs team that is more thorough in making sure they know of every single meeting going on. And meetings and organizations are really our main source. We do also encourage and do not discourage individuals from writing us or connecting with us or calling us. I mean, that's all part of the work. But at the same time, it is really that strong civic culture in this town with a lot of people who have a lot to say that are in, usually have some kind of organizational thing that helps us really know what's going on.
Thank you much. Next, we're going to hear from Table 7.
Hi, guys. I'm Gail from Mount Washington. Thank you all for coming out here. And so my question is about housing. Our question, I should say, is about housing, but I think I know you're shocked, Ray. So I think for us, one of our concerns as we see all types of different development happening in neighborhoods, whether it is, the construction of large multifamily residential, whether it's for market or subsidized, as well as even just, maybe the small real estate investor who's, buying the next door property to flip that or rent it out or something like that. So what are some of the measures that you're putting in place to really support affordable housing development and responsible housing development?
I'm going to start and then hand it to Jessica. First I'm going to talk about something she's doing, and then she can talk about what I'm doing. But one thing is that just as a baseline, and again, I'm going to ask just a little bit more, is like we are pretty clear on exactly where and how many income restricted units we have in the city. One of the single most important things is to preserve the stock of affordable housing that we have. We've got about a little over 12,000 income restricted units, and it's important. And we've always been concerned that we wouldn't know and we couldn't monitor when ones were coming up for renewal that might come out of the program. I think we're pretty clear on that right now. I think we're ready. We can avoid that. Again, that's really more for Jessica. For planning, we've been fortunate to have two major things that were oriented to this, which was one, that we have incentives, which are in the RIV zoning, the 35-mile rezoning of the riverfronts and the neighborhoods adjacent to the riverfronts. We have incentives that give in return for increased height and a few other things that are important to developers if you supply affordable housing. Secondly, more recently, the Planning Commission passed the Lawrenceville-driven program, which is really driven by the community for a inclusionary zoning proposal. And that actually made it through the Planning Commission and is now been delivered to City Council, and we expect that to be reviewed. That's a pilot of an inclusionary program, which could be bigger and could be in other parts of the city. But I think that the first step is this is a pilot where it's a very clear rationale. The community has done all the legwork to bring a really clear rationale as to why and how, in addition to the background of the research and reports that have been done by the city. And I think we're going to see, there's a lot to learn through this one, and we're going to see some good work on it. So, Jessica.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everything he just said, plus I will say that through the Housing Opportunity Fund, which is the city's local housing trust fund, in addition to looking at de-restricted units, like Ray said, and building new affordable rental units, about half of the trust fund money in the 2018 round and now in 2019 is going towards home ownership and really looking at affordable housing as not just rental, but the fact that there is a lot of housing in cities' neighborhoods, a lot of it that's currently owned by folks that need a lot of home improvements, and they need some help doing that. So we're looking at preserving affordable housing from that standpoint as well, and also encouraging people to look at the home ownership option because it can often be more affordable than people think. So we also have programs that we're running for that as well.
Cool. I also want to note that we're now joined by Director Mara Kennedy from Permits, Licenses, and Inspections. So we're going to hear from Table 1.
Hello. How are air and water quality included in the priorities, critical infrastructure and the climate priorities? And what are some examples of proposed projects? Would water line replacement be included among them?
So water line replacement is actually handled by the PWSA through their program, but we have some initiatives through the mayor's office, specifically our grants office goes after quite a bit of things. Grant Gitlin manages the grants office with OMB. And so, Grant, if you want to speak to some of the grants we've recently applied for, I know we've done a lot to electrify our fleet as a recent example. Oh, sorry, do you mind to pass the microphone down to the...
I was going to say that there's two things that I would note, and some of them might, as you know, we have a work together through Green Building Alliance very actively on setting higher standards for energy use and more efficient use of energy. And so though that sort of Pittsburgh 2030 program, as well as related programs we're doing, is really, that is the intent, that by having the buildings, which as you know are a big percentage of our air quality challenge, to make sure that they're running more efficiently, and new ones are much more efficient in terms of their energy use, and then what comes out of the stacks or whatever the equivalent is in terms of the result of that energy use. So that is actually a very active part of our program. We incentivize it in our performance zoning in Uptown and the Uptown Eco Innovation District, as well as the riverfront. We incentivize a lower energy intensity use, and that gets you points, which then helps you. We think it's a strong incentive. We also use it as a guide when we work with large institutions, and we have a facility between the city's resources, some outside sources, with the sustainability and resilience team to really give people real advice on how to do a better energy system, and they're listening, and not always with a mandate, not always with like a regulatory stick, sometimes because they just don't really have the right capacity they just don't know how to do it yet. Stormwater, as you know, is we are working the first stormwater, which turns into water quality, is an issue because if you can control the stormwater, you don't have the combined sewer overflow. This is not about the issue of lead in the pipes, and others can get to that. But in terms of the quality of the water when it ends up in our waterways and so forth, which is deeply impacted because our combined sewer overflow system is somewhat antiquated and hasn't been improved. So the best thing we can do is really seriously manage how that water, when it hits the ground, doesn't just go into the pipes, but rather can go into green infrastructure and various other systems. And we're encouraging that first by working with PWSA and we've changed the regs already to get sort of in line with the state mandate about where we need to be, and for the county really. And then we're just starting now the phase 2, where we're probably going to raise the standards of our expectations of how much stormwater you manage on your own site, so that doesn't go into the system, tax it, cause the overflow, and then send basically sewage into our waterways. So I think others may be able to answer better on the lead lines and those issues.
I will say while they're passing the microphone that we do have that lens whenever we're approaching some of the capital proposals that we get. Something that we've been pushing for is adding meters to city pools, for example. We were a free customer, so why do we need to meter them? For us, it's been really important to add backflow preventers and add meters to get a sense of not only how much are we using, but how much are we losing? How much is leaking out of the pool liner and going into the ground? So with the new agreement we have with PWSA, that's going to be a big part of our follow through on that, and we'll get a much better sense of where we're leaking water.
Yeah, so could you just repeat, what was the specific lead line question? Was it whether or not we'll have money in the city's budget, or sorry?
Is that factored into any examples that could be among the critical infrastructure or climate infrastructure priorities?
Yeah. So even though most of that money is coming from PWSA, it's a priority. But primarily, PWSA is operating right now this year the lead line program on a $49 million grant that we worked very hard to get from the state. They spent about $50 million last year to run last year's program, and have a 2026 goal and commitment to the public that was in a public plan to do that. So the city is a partner in that, but most of that work is, while it's a shared goal, the funding will come from them. I think some examples in addition to what Ray said is, I think going back probably 5 or 6 years now, we passed clean construction legislation with a lot of support, maybe from folks in this room. And we're able to finally do our first clean construction bid, the McFerrin Street Bridge in Duck Hollow. And so that's a big win. In addition to that, just continuing to electrify our fleet. We have 9 new electric vehicles that are going to be coming online, 2 new CNG refuse trucks, new solar charging stations, all sorts of efforts to just kind of piece by piece work towards a more sustainable fleet. So,
Table 6, do you have a question you'd like to pose?
I'm going to try not using the microphone, so it's a little rumbling, and I've got a voice like a loudspeaker. So when we were looking at the capital budget priorities, we were starting to notice that many of the priorities could actually just fit under 2 of them, being equity and critical infrastructure. And when we talked about our different neighborhoods and something that faces all of us rather than just some of us, we talked about how the neighborhoods are so inaccessible from other neighborhoods, whether that's because of topography or transportation issues or whatever the case may be. It's our understanding that the city of Pittsburgh does not control any part of the Port Authority, so I'm not going to ask you to change the Port Authority. But what we do want to know is what sort of things fit under the capital budget umbrella that may be able to address being able to get from one neighborhood to another. Because that also addresses a lot of the questions that were up there as far as, do we want more facilities with less amenities or less facilities with more amenities? That really boils down to how easy it is to get to. And so that also we talked about could be make sure that success spreads from one neighborhood to another to get to the neighborhood. But we're not sure how that fits into the capital budget. And so I don't know who can answer that, but that's what we're wondering.
So transportation planning is a hot topic, and for good reason. We have Jeff Scalacan from the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure can talk about some of the neighborhood planning we've done. I know they've also done a lot of kind of first mile, last mile work to figure out how to get people to Port Authority stops and how to get the right routes identified for pedestrians and cyclists. But Jeff, I'll let you take it away.
Well, Dave, that's a great question. So our department was formed about 2 years ago from the mayor's office to help solve these. Can you guys hear me? To help solve these issues is a connectivity. So I'm in the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, and one of our main goals is to connect the neighborhoods. So we are working with the Port Authority and other partners for that connectivity. We're looking at connectivity, anything from like sidewalks, to be able to get yourself from point A to point B, to be able to walk. Right now, that's one of our initiatives, is to be able for you to leave your house and be able to get fresh fruit and fresh produce in a 20-minute span without being able to jump in your car and go to a grocery store. We do have, I believe, 4 plans out right now in the neighborhoods that are addressing this issue, okay? So it's a study. So the study right now will be able to help us determine what those missing links are going forward. I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just add things that I'm not saying that the Port Authority isn't here, so I'm channeling them about how great their system is. But they do have a point a lot of times, and I think it's our responsibility as a city and in other ways to try and figure out how do we, because for example, we've been talking to the stakeholders on Hamilton Avenue in that zone kind of near Larmer and sort of across the busway from Bakery Square. And one of the things that the Port Authority at the meeting reminded them is that they actually have a lot of bus service right there. There's a lot, they're actually a very well-served area, kind of, if you're trying to get people to that corridor and back. But what you don't know is, what you have to take into consideration is a lot of times the kind of, even if there's a decent bus stop and so forth, but that walk, that first mile, last mile, sometimes is in bad shape, sometimes it has some weird dark patches. So it's not just about the bus service itself, it's also about what makes it kind of normal to walk or however you move to get to that bus. Similarly, how do you make sure that it's really normal to be able to use your bike, especially for things like the busways, and that it's safe and you feel, all those things. Those are things that are part of the work of DOMI, of planning, of a neighborhood plan. So that's all in the mix. Because I've found that, frankly, it's sort of making the apps really available to everybody. Because with the apps, it radically changes your experience of riding the bus if you actually use those real apps in terms of like dependability or the sense of control over what's happening. And finally, a really critical part that does make it into neighborhood plans, institutional master plans, what we ask for, what DOMI asks for from a project, especially a large major project, we're pushing much harder for getting them to do not just a traffic impact study, but a transportation demand management. And the reason I mentioned that, because transportation demand management is really one of its main tools is to get people onto public transit rather than driving their individual car to places. And with that, and you make that easier through actually, you can incentivize it in terms of, and all that, once you sort of begin to sort of create a culture where an awful lot of people go into work, an awful lot of people sort of need that connection, becomes used to it, they become the advocates for the system to actually service neighborhoods better and so forth as well. And so we basically build it's not just that you're going to help reduce the traffic impact if people take the bus, you're really building a constituency that's going to make clearer what their real needs are, and and have a voice in it that's even stronger than today. So I'm really encouraged about it because it's frustrating because the Port Authority has a really strong bad budget challenge, and that's why some of what we need to do is actually improve the experience with what we got, and we can do some of that in the streets, sidewalks, etc. We're going to keep working on that.
So a couple things to add. Well, first of all, a quick technical note. The city channel is here recording. The proceedings are going to be posted on the YouTube channel afterwards. It's important, though, that we speak into the microphones. That's how they actually are recording all the audio. So we should try, if we can, to speak into the microphone.
Dave, real quick to me. To finish your question about how you get other projects on the capital budget, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, we do have an email set up if you go through the website. It's domi@pittsburghpa.gov. So if you have any ideas that will help us out, we encourage to send us an email and let us know what that is, what the connection is, what you're thinking about, and we can connect with you and talk about it, okay?
And if you've been flipping through the budget, you notice that most of where our money is going is to a specific location. That for us is a big transparency initiative. That's a big accountability initiative. When it comes to Complete Streets, though, with what DOMI is doing, there are two really critical items that don't really have locations. One is called critical sidewalk gaps. The other one is called neighborhood traffic calming. The project managers actually determine the projects based on data that they receive from things like this meeting from 311. So if you see something, if you see a broken sidewalk, you see an ADA ramp that doesn't look right, put in a 311 because the project manager is actually getting those notes every time they come through, and that helps determine some of the projects that they decide to work with. So next we're going to hear from Table 8.
Hi, Gordon Davidson, Mount Washington and Duquesne Heights. I think this question goes across all the departments and offices. How can the city partner with community groups beyond just capital budget planning and feedback, especially regarding implementation?
Is that implementation of a specific type of project or just kind of in general? Yeah. Can I pitch this actually to OCA to talk about like project-specific meeting series? Also, I know for DOMI, they have a lot of meetings on some of the larger projects, especially some of the ones on the north side, like we've had with the West Ohio Street Bridge. But just in general, we can talk to OCA.
Hi, folks. My name is Molly. I'm the Community Affairs Manager for the Office of Community Affairs. So the role of our organization, and I'm glad that you asked this, Gordon. I'm actually a little annoyed that you asked this because I'm at your meetings every month to talk about projects. Just kidding. I'm only teasing. When we do have big projects, what the Office of Community Affairs does is when we're at Full Tilt, there's 4 of us. We go out to the 90 neighborhoods for their community meetings. So we, right now, I think we're visiting about 92% when we have 3 people. But so we try to get out, and you can always ask your liaison what's going on with a project. It's our job to be the bridge between the community and the government. So we can cut through the red tape and get to, ask the folks up there who we need to get information from about a project. So that's one way. The other is we also work with the departments and authorities as well to plan public meetings around projects. So we are trying to increase transparency all the time by sending out regular email updates, having regular meetings, and making sure that we're all just staying in touch on meetings like that. But if you're not experiencing that, give us a call and let us know, and we can get you updates on the projects that you're asking about. Does that answer your question, Gordon, for a little bit? No? Sorry.
Yes, we interact with you folks very well, and I appreciate that. The question is, when projects are planned for our neighborhoods, the community groups, I believe, often don't get consulted regarding implementation.
Like the actual project being constructed or done, or I don't know if you have a specific in mind. I would also like to just give a shout out to the departments and authorities. They have been very good as well at, we've been improving having project-specific pages. So keeping those updated. I know Domi's really, they've been on the ball on that kind of thing. But I don't know, I'm going to hand it back to Dave if there's a specific type of project that maybe one of our departments could speak to, or maybe it's something we can talk about offline. We can address that.
I mean, it's Mount Washington. Yeah, it's something in Mount Washington, right? Okay. I mean, yeah, is it a private project or a public? Okay, all right. Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, I assume I would guess that it's DOMI related, because that's most of what we're doing. But you could say so. So, yeah. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot. I'm just trying to figure, because, I mean, to answer the question, the way I would have answered it is that I think we do a lot of partnership on implementation. But if we're talking about how, once a side, Grandview Avenue, is replanned, how does the community stay involved and actually get consulted in what happens there? That's a little bit different than, let's say, the Allegheny Circle conversion, where there's been a significant amount of planning effort and money put up and continued back and forth between the city and Buell and all the stakeholders. So and again, we can talk more about I'm just guessing the Mount Washington issues because of the recent sidewalk collapse and that, but maybe it's, yeah.
We just kind of refined it.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, generally, I think the city puts up a lot of money into implementation, and I think all of us would be happy to talk about specific examples of where you don't feel like that's going well. Where everybody, even beyond this table, doesn't feel like that's going well, so that we can answer for what we haven't done. I know that there are projects that go on that there's a lot of consternation around. 4 Mile Run, I'll just say it. And so I think that there's disagreement that happens, but a lot of the folks that are here came in to try to get beyond the constant planning and not putting up money to actually implement things. I think we're doing certainly a better job than we have in the history. And I would also add that I think we're doing a better job at trying to get private funders to join in those efforts, so that when a city line item goes away or is reduced, like CDBG, that there's still funding there for organizations to continue.
So while we pass the mic to Emily, I want to say you guys are very effective when it comes to attending these meetings. I see, I don't want to say the fallout, but I see the results with the project managers getting a chance to rethink some projects based on community feedback. I would, however, encourage you to not just come out whenever it's something that you're concerned about or worried about, but also come out to the projects that you support and speak to those projects and why they're important for you. I think a lot of times your neighbor may not realize how that bike lane is going to improve your life, or how the new playground's really going to help whenever you have your kids out in the park.
Hi, everybody. I'm Emily Mitchell. I manage the Economic Development Department at the URA, and I appreciate your question because it's something that we're at the URA working on all the time. As we get through as we're working on major development projects, how do we partner with the community to make sure that we get a really successful project? And we continue to work on that, and one of the ways that we're doing that is through our RFP processes. Our real estate department has really developed this kind of program where we're meeting out with the community ahead of releasing a request for proposals for development of a large site, so that we can really get good insight from the community groups on what the plans are for the project. We work with community groups, also with our partners at City Planning, to really understand the comprehensive plan. But on that lens, we also work with a lot of community organizations through technical assistance to help them implement their neighborhood initiatives, and we want to do that more. So we're actually contemplating a new program, which would be a grant program for neighborhood initiatives, where we could work with community-based organizations or nonprofit organizations to really help implement some of those neighborhood initiatives. So we're working kind of through the logistics of that, but we're really looking forward to working more with those community-based organizations.
All right.
Additionally, just real fast, David, on the housing side as well, with a lot of the housing endeavors at the URA, including the Housing Opportunity Fund, the legislation actually for the fund, states that there needs to be community involvement and nonprofit involvement in most of the programs of the fund. So when we do the RFP process, that's a part of that process, is to know that the community has been briefed on the project.
Here's a second question from table 9.
How you doing? My name is William Parker. I'm not sure if any of you individuals, I didn't see Heidi or Santiago here, so that's who my question was addressed to. But I'm not sure if you all are familiar with an organization right across the street by the name of Innovation Works. Okay, I want to address this. I actually want to come over into the camera because this organization is depriving our communities from investment dollars. I mean, this is investment dollars that's coming directly from the government. And they have over 370 companies in their portfolio, and less than 1 or 2% of those investment dollars go into the people of color in our communities. And that needs to change today. I mean, today. A lot of the investment dollars that they put out into these companies has a direct impact of all the subject matter that we're here talking about. There's more people that need to be involved. There's a lot of empty seats at this table, and there are people of color who should be at these seats at these tables. And a lot of us are feeling left out, and we are being left out. There's a government facility, housing development right across the street. Innovation Works put up a wall. Like literally, they built a wall to separate themselves from the commons right here, so people can't even see across the street when they're holding events. They don't even want to put their name in so people could see or find out what the investments that they should be making into our communities. They don't want anybody to know, and I'm here to speak out about that. So please take this message back with you. Share this message with your colleagues. They're doing a horrible job, and it's time that they start investing in diversity.
Thank you much. Table 7, do you have a second question you'd like to ask?
Hi, I'm Carrie Iwema. I live 2 blocks from here. Our other second question was partially addressed by the public transportation question, but it's, considering the heavy traffic patterns, the merge points, the tunnel monsters, how does traffic fit into the capital budget in terms of like the excess traffic and pollution, and again, the public transportation, which was kind of addressed?
Yes, we're going to pass the mic down. Traffic is a almost universal issue. I live on a street, and it's uphill, and cars are still flying up the hill. There's blind spots. There's a crosswalk. It's scary. It's not fun. There's kids, strollers, dogs. So I'm definitely with you on that one. But let's hear from Jeff.
So again, this is a great question. This has been the same question that we've been hearing over and over from the communities and the council people in the districts. Okay. So this year we have a position that's going to be posted. It's a Tdm Coordinator, which means Traffic Demand Management Coordinator. We are going to have a person on staff that's going to be able to tackle the issues in the city of how is traffic going to flow better? How are we going to slow down traffic? If there's I know where you live at, a lot of people take the shortcuts to get, we're looking to be able to solve those problems and those issues, but we created a position in the capital budget, and like I said, the position is posted, will be posted, I think in the next month, and that's the major, then we'll create projects with that position in the capital budget is the goal, okay?
Thank you much. We're going to hear from table 1 again.
Hi, good evening. My name is Rachel. I live in Ingram. You guys answered our question, so I just made up a new question. I would like to hear from you, various representatives of various departments, how you incorporate concepts of sustainability in your plan, in your capital budget, and not just sustainability, but maximum use of the capital assets that the city holds and maintains.
Well, I really think Dave may be able to answer this as well. We're fortunate that the department and its sustainability and resilience division works very closely with the city and with now the Bureau of Building. Let's call it the Bureau of Building. But we're the asset. And so one of the work that Dave and others were part of, and others at this table, basically we have a very good grip on our assets now, and we have a very good grip on their energy use. And we've actually, one of our team members completed a study of the energy use of our assets, and our fleet as well as part of that discussion. The numbers are not where we want them to be right now. There's some buildings that, it's possible that the building that would be the largest one was not designed for energy efficiency at the city-county building. But that said, we're improving it. We already have seen improvement in the last couple of years, and we're putting in the kind of systems that will continue to improve it. Same thing with the fleet. As you probably heard, we've introduced electric vehicles, introduced hybrid vehicles. That's been an important part of it, but also charging stations, which are solar-powered charging stations, which are trying to actually truly have a fossil fuel-free energy source for even our vehicles. So that's all happening, and we are measuring it. We'll continue to measure it. That's part of our program of because we're very much aware that we need to set the example as we ask businesses and institutions to rise to it. So I can tell you from having reviewed that energy report of our own assets, we're not where we want to be, but we are definitely on the way.
We've also beefed up the language in a lot of our RFPs that DPW puts out for our facilities to include those elements whenever we're getting design professionals hired. And then also when it comes to our fleet, we have a new fleet manager who's taking a pretty long look at all of the individual fleets that the departments have and saying, if each of these departments require cars that maybe they're using 4 hours a day or 2 hours a day, is there a way that we can move to a shared motor pool model that allows for more efficiency, that's originating less cars, and that there's fewer assets just kind of sitting out?
Hi, I'm Maura Kennedy with Permits, Licenses, and Inspections, and the portion of our budget that deals with the capital budget is demolitions. So we do, in some cases, demolish vacant, blighted properties or things that are otherwise structurally dangerous, and we're doing that in a much more sustainable way. Prior to this, the previous administrations hadn't redone the specs. So they would literally tear down the house and bury all of the materials just in the void. They wouldn't puncture the void, so it would create huge rainwater and stormwater issues, and they would allow all that toxic material to be buried in our soil. So that's why you have a lot of these communities where we did have high rates of demolition, have really unfortunately polluted land. So it's not safe for your kids to play on in many areas. It's not safe to be used for community gardens. So something that the Peduto administration really prioritized in the early days was rewriting that spec. So now we make sure that we regrade the land in a way that's safe for stormwater and doesn't hurt that problem. And now we make sure that all non-toxic fill is being used only. We do 4 inches of topsoil and specialize local seeds to make sure that it can be regrown in a way that's an asset for the community. We're working with our colleagues at DPW to do a better job of cutting lots on a more regular basis. So, I know no one likes a vacant lot, and that's not a great productive outuse. But we don't want those types of outcomes to be more blighting on the community and create more environmental hazards. We're also working with our colleagues at PWSA to identify parts of the city where there are blighted properties, where there's also stormwater plans or problems. So we're creating joint plans where we can actually address both of those issues at once. Mitigate the blight, mitigate the vacant properties, and also create good green rainwater management systems.
Yeah, related to that, we also try and layer in that consideration with capital planning, especially around park projects. So Whiteman, Homewood Willie Stargell Field are two really big ticket projects that we looked at, and they were in critical zones according to PWSA's stormwater plan. So for us, it was an easy invite to the table to say, how can we layer in what you need to put under the ground to make sure that we're helping with the stormwater as well. We're going to hear from table 6 again.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lori Beth Jones. I live in Crafton Heights, West Side. The forgotten cardinal direction of the city of Pittsburgh. We exist. So the question, I think our question at this point is kind of how much planning and community input are we gathering and communicating with one another before a project is placed? I know that has improved a lot just in the last 5 years, 2 years, but also, you know, what is the shelf life of a plan? We hear a lot of times, so we did a plan for that, we did a plan for that, and a lot of these plans are 15 and 20 and 25 years old. And I think some of that information is going into a lot of different places. It's going into like the paving schedules and things that look at the streets in tiny blocks, sometimes seemingly without taking into consideration the space around it, the sidewalk, the accessibility, the bus station access, the what have you, and it feels a little bit piecemeal at times. So how does that work, and how much, you know, are we kind of all working together on that?
So Director Gassel can speak to the durability of neighborhood plans. We actually do a few different layers of plans. Neighborhood plans are kind of I won't say the biggest, but they're one of the biggest types of plans that we do. We also do asset-specific plans, so transportation plans through a certain corridor, like we're going to do in the Hill District. And then we can also do site-specific plans, like if we want to do a site master plan for Southside Park that we did last year through city planning as well. That can really inform how we decide what to do with capital dollars when we go to construction. But in terms of choosing neighborhood plans and the durability thereof, do you want to speak to that, Director?
Thank you. There's no perfect science about how long a plan is useful. Usually, though, with neighborhood plans, we look at it as a 10-year plan. And I think it's roughly accurate that usually the kind of, one, it takes a while to make all the aspects of what you addressed or desired in that plan to happen. And 10 years is a good benchmark for dealing with whether it's streets and mobility, whether it's open space, whether it's the kind of your central business district. So I think that I think there's a shelf life of a good 10 years on a plan, and that's how we do them today. We expect if we finish in 2020, it's going to be a good plan through 2030. And it also depends. Sometimes while it sometimes seems like we're moving really fast as a city or changing really fast, in certain ways we are, but at the same time we were, compared to most of our peer cities, a slow growth city. So that again, I think 10 years, there may be some of the things still didn't get done or are going to get done. So the other parts of the world, like a park plan, usually a park master plan, which we do some of that work together with our colleagues at the Department of Public Works and City Parks. Those usually have a horizon of something a little more than 10 years. They're really thinking more to 15 and so. But at the same time, you could, you don't really know what you can predict certain things, but certain aspects about the neighborhood or community needs could have some shifts in 10 years. And that's why even if you have a good solid plan, you might want to take another look at it 10 years later. So I mean, that's sort of a general answer to your response. I think that, the work we're doing with Sheridan Park now, in the West End, without... Oh, the Western neighborhoods, I'm sorry, that's a more accurate way to go for what you're describing. But in the work that we're doing in that area that I just mentioned, I think that'll be, that could be the park will be meaningful for 10, 15 years or so. And we certainly hope it'll last for that long. I don't know if you wanted to, there was a lot of things you mentioned were involved transportation and so forth, and which, again, that's one where, and I'll hand it over to the expert, but the transportation is changing right now, not just in terms of the density and the number of people, but we're going to, the transportation plan could be looking at a huge wide range, but we are really in an active, dynamic situation about changing how people move. And so I'll let Jeff talk about that more.
Okay, I'll touch about our paving plan. DOMI does pave and plan every 2 years. The main reason why we do 2 years is because of the price of the asphalt. It could change so much. We also have to work, when we do a paving plan, we also have to take in account of the utility companies. As everybody knows, with PWSA, with their lead line replacement, they're tearing up the streets and they're also doing their own paving when they restore the streets. So we really, we look 2 years ahead, and then we will target it each year around like November, December for the following year. To see, we work with the utility company. We work with PennDOT. Like right now, the Shaler Street Bridge is out. So PennDOT's in their project is just the Shaler Street project, the Shaler Street Bridge project. But we will look to piggyback off with PennDOT, and we'll pave, going the on-ramp to going on the Shaler Street Bridge. So we incorporate planning with also our other partners.
Thank you much. We're going to hear another question from table 8.
Good evening. My name is Anna Archer, and I live in Highland Park. Our question is more of a budget process question, and we were talking at our table about how there was a $17 million surplus in the 2018 budget. And so is there a community process like this to inform how that's spent, and what data and community response goes into those projects that were funded then in 2018 with the surplus?
So we're actually in that process right now. That's the good news. That's what these meetings are for. It helps us inform what to do whenever we do happen to get some extra money. It's rare. I wish that happened more often. I'm looking at Bill and Andrew because they also have to score all these proposals, and it's not fun sometimes to basically cut things that are really valuable projects that we just don't have enough money for. I'm not familiar with the specific example of the surplus, but the PAYGO funds that are represented in the budget are kind of a surplus from the operating budget that's in excess of tax revenue. That's the cheapest money we have. It's very flexible. It's great. So we love to see those operating revenue results, because then we can use that money for things that bond funds can't really pay for, that CDBG, Community Development Block Grant funds, can't really pay for. And it's also a good sign that we're in a good sustaining budget cycle that way.
Yes, but as you know, well, first off, we don't call it a surplus. We call it a positive operating result. Because those monies are going to be reused as no profit. So, but David's right. We take some funds and we will transfer it over to the capital budget. In the operating budget, and we want to make sure that we have always have a fund balance. It's like having a rainy day fund. You should have at least 6 months to be able to pay bills 3 to 6 months. We try to keep that in terms of a minimum of 10 to 15% of what our expenditure budget is. But those funds then can be utilized, and they don't have the same restrictions that a bond fund would have on it. So you're able to fix a lot more things, asphalt, paving, things that have a shorter life cycle on it. In fact, our equipment, and I'm on the Equipment Leasing Authority, we're talking about vehicles and things like that. That's all should be paid through, all those things should be paid through the, what we call the PAYGO funds. And it's pay as you go, that's why. So yeah, that's how we plan to try to do that. There's a cap amount of money that we're able to utilize every year, and we work with David to figure out what that amount of money is. There's going to be another bond issue for this year, approximately $60 million this year. And those funds will be tied up for some of the larger projects and some of our state match projects where it has a life that exceeds 20 years, but the other funds will go into to fill in the gaps there. Do we know how much money we're always going to have at the end of the year? No, it all depends on what happens through the operating budget process. And as I said, we need to keep that additional money in there, because when we have that working on the operating end, those monies we borrow come much cheaper for us as well, too, lower interest rates.
Yeah, I can try. Whoa, that's a lot louder. Now I understand. So in our office, the city controller is elected citywide, and we do a lot of reporting independent and objectively on city services. So, as has been shared, I think, through all the different departments here, nothing is happening in a vacuum. There is a lot of coordination that happens with the departments, with the different authorities, with the utilities, to evaluate, prioritize, and many times the prioritization has to deal with immediate safety issues, that there is something in the infrastructure that has failed that has to be addressed, almost as an emergency status. So I think with the plan and the planning process, it gets, I think it's really the design phase that I could understandably relate that is very long and drawn out because there is so much coordination that until a project is shovel ready, that can be implemented can sometimes be extremely long. So having regular updated meetings with project managers, we have a sense of what some of the bottlenecks might be, but these opportunities are extremely beneficial, I think, across the board to all of us. So I'm happy to discuss this more, but I think, there are so many steps, and to get things implemented, and once they're done, that's why I think we all celebrate to live in the kind of city we want to live in.
Yeah, I think, to be honest, my experience at least is more often it goes in the opposite direction and something unexpected comes up that we have to pay for, like, hillsides just falling off the front of a mountain. That's been happening. I'm looking at Jeff because Jeff's just been called out at 5 in the morning to go figure out how to fix a landslide. Those projects can cost over $1 million pretty easily. So we've tried our best to monitor those things, to predict them. Of course, they tie into green infrastructure, they tie into our resiliency planning. All those things kind of weave together, but there's always going to be those things that pop up that we can't quite plan for. Did every table get to do at least 2 questions? I think I got everybody. Does anybody, we have time for maybe one more, or we can get into survey land? We'll do one more in the front.
Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. So I have a question about something that touches on a number of the mayor's capital budget priorities: equity, children and families. It is a critical infrastructure, green infrastructure. It is part of mobility, access to arts and culture. Sidewalks. Sidewalks are a public good, right? But we have ceded the responsibility for maintaining that to private citizens. And it doesn't have to be this way. There are cities that take full responsibility for their sidewalks. Can we ever have a truly multimodal transportation system as long as it's in the hands of private individuals to take care of sidewalks? Can we ensure access to the youngest and oldest in the most visible part of our public infrastructure? Can it ever be equitable? Truly, if lower income communities just are unable to maintain them as much as our wealthier communities. So I know the answer to why can't this happen is probably would have to be legislation, right? But I'm asking you all here together, if you were given that directive, if you could imagine that being in the future for the city, what would we need to happen in your departments to make this possible? What changes would need to be made? What kind of grants or funding would need to be leveraged to, obviously this would be a big, a heavy lift, right? What can you tell us that would have to happen across the city to make this possible?
The short and ugly answer is more taxes. I'll let Jeff speak to some of the work that we're doing in sidewalks, and Director Kennedy, we've spoken before about private ownership versus public good. It's definitely a tricky issue, but.
David, if I could just add something. One of the things also would be folks to contact their federal representatives. The Community Development Block Grant is a program that's been cut significantly. At one point in time, and I think Jessica may remember this, or it's prior, there used to be a sidewalk program within the Urban Redevelopment Authority that would go targeted specifically to low-income communities. That's what the community development block grants were about. Unfortunately, that money's reduced over the last 15, 20 years. So some sort of lobbying effort on the city's part, continual, but we'll have to see a different change in the federal government as well, too, to allow us to get those more money. Otherwise, we're going to have to increase taxes. And my 9 members, I don't think like having to do that, and neither does the mayor.
I'll touch on that, too. And so going back to the mobility part again with what I was saying before, I think it was about 5 years ago that the city, so it's really a touchy subject right now, not just say touchy, but a complicated subject about who owns the sidewalks and the whole sidewalk restoration for the city of Pittsburgh. We received, we've been applying for grants actually, and we won. We received a $980,000 grant for construction, okay? And so that money is gonna go into sidewalks. It's called Critical Gap Sidewalks, and we were awarded it last year. We have we're working on the design of the project right now, and we identified Irvine Street in Hazelwood area, and that's on a state road. So right now the PennDOT does not, they do not build or pay for sidewalks. So when PennDOT designs a road and builds a road, the city pays for the sidewalks. And that's one thing we have been working with the DOT for the past 2.5 years since our department was formed. And like I said, we just received $980,000 the first time, I think like in 5 years that we received money for critical sidewalk gaps. And so we're gonna look, and the program opens up again, I think in July of this year, and we are gonna apply again.
I will pass it to Director Kennedy. I would also add that, we were talking a little bit, Director Ricks of DOMI often brings up Ithaca, New York, who is probably the largest municipality area that does this, that has taken over all responsibility for the sidewalks. It is obviously extremely costly. We as far as legally what change will need to be made, I think we can get that answer for you. We think it's a state law that does it, but nonetheless, to add to Jeff's comment too, we have with Penn Avenue, that project, as well as Brookline Boulevard, done the entirety of the sidewalks as part of a public infrastructure project. We were not able to do that on the south side, primarily because of what Jeff was talking about. The state made the decision to proceed with the work, the curb-to-curb work, the roadway, and they don't pay for sidewalks. So we found $3 million extra to do some of the other stuff that the community wanted, street lights and benches and so on and so forth, but doing the sidewalks, which I think the estimate that DOMI came up with in that case was to go from 10th Street to the Southside Works was about $20 million, not considering the vaults that are under it. So there's some significant money, but we don't in every case just say, no, that's the private property owner. If we're doing a large-scale public works project and we have the money, we do try to tackle that. And there is still, although it's minor, there is a sidewalk reimbursement amount in the code that could be looked at. So worth noting too. For homeowners that replace their sidewalk, that is.
So you're right. The current system is that the owner is responsible for maintaining their sidewalk, and PLI is the agency actually that cites people that have issues. I will say I think that that's an interesting philosophical question. Most of the municipalities that I'm aware of that do take ownership for the sidewalks are in the south, where frankly the costs are just a lot cheaper to maintain sidewalks. They don't have the types of freeze-thaw cycles that we do, so it's it would be a significant undertaking. But I will say in general, PLI's compliance rates for violations are high. We have, last time we ran the numbers, just shy of 80% compliance rate pre-court. So if you call us 311, you can track your ticket all the way from complaint on Building I or through the 311 website, all the way through the court process if it gets there, or through compliance. You can also see all of the other complaints that have been called in around your neighborhood. So if there is a problematic sidewalk in your community, please check the map to see, has someone alerted the city to this problem? We try to be proactive, we try to call out issues when we see them, but we can't be everywhere all the time. So we really appreciate people. Sometimes I go out to a community meeting and everyone's, gosh, this has been a vacant house for 20 years. And I'll look back and we haven't gotten a single call on it for the last 5 that we've been keeping records. So, please don't assume that we know of problems in your community. I'd rather get 10 calls on the same problem instead of no calls. We do generally have a good compliance rate. I know it's not helpful and doesn't go to your point of, the city taking responsibility for it, but I will say we have a good track record of improving sidewalk conditions, working with communities when we are alerted of them.
There's one major, just to keep in the sidewalk vein, but one major point that we forgot, and that is the accessibility into the one-step program. So it's technically part of the sidewalk, but the URA does maintain and actually increased funding for business owners to get grants to cover that one-step, that entrance into restaurants. That came in part because they're great people, but in part because of some advocacy from the ADA community at last year's council session. And I think you're going to see more of that. We're coming up on the 75th anniversary, if that's correct, but of the ADA next year. So it will be a huge topic. But I think the one-step program is a success and is something that is well-funded, and the URA should get a lot of credit for maintaining that and making sure that people can get into our commercial establishments. So.
The URA also has, in our home improvement loans for low-income homeowners, we have sidewalk grants as part of that as well. So if people go through our home improvement programs, they can also get a sidewalk through those.
So those are some excellent panel questions. Thank you very much for posing those. I'd also like to say thank you to all of my coworkers for coming out tonight. We'll be doing this again on Tuesday, so come on back. So, seated in front of us, we have decades of experience, advanced degrees in difficult things like engineering that I can't even understand myself, experience working in other cities and different authorities. There's a lot of great people on this panel right now. I'm just going to set the table for everybody. So starting stage left, your right, we have Bill Urbanek, City Council Budget Director, Director Mara Kennedy from Permits, Licenses, and Inspections, Assistant Director from DPW, Marcel Newman. Luann Horan, Assistant Director from City Parks. Assistant Director Andrew Dash from City Planning. We have Lindsay Powell from the Mayor's Office. Thank you for joining us. Eric Setzler is our new Chief Engineer in the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. We have Tom Cummings, honestly one of my favorite people in city government. I gotta say, you're never leaving, right, Tom? You're staying forever? Forever? Public commitment from Tom. So Sheila Namani Stanger does a lot of economic development work for the URA as well as the director there. We also have Josh Summits from Business Expansion. He does a lot of the small business work that the URA participates in. So we're going to have questions to the panel. We're going to start, what's your table number? You 7? Lucky number 7.
Hello, my question is infrastructure, in specifically the city steps. I fell in February and got a concussion, missed a month's worth of work because of crappy city steps. And they're not maintained like they should be, like a city street under the ordinance. And I don't know a set of city steps in this city that's in good condition. I mean, if there is, I'd like to see it because it needs to go in a museum. But I think that's a very, very important topic because it's something that's been neglected for so long.
So we're going to have Eric answer that. We had a really great prioritization process that happened starting, I think, 2016, 2017, that was completed last year that's got some great data that Eric's going to allude to. And I also want to say I'm sorry for your injury. I also want to say if you see anything like that, we have 311's a great resource. We also have Wendy Urbanik from our 311 team is here tonight, actually. So if you have anything specifically that you know in your neighborhood needs fixed, feel free to stop by Wendy's table on your way out. But Eric, take it away.
I will say from Delmi's perspective, I agree with your assessment of the steps. You know, we built, I think we're lucky how many steps we have, but they were built a long time ago. And quite honestly, we have not kept up with the maintenance. We have not invested in them over the years. We are trying to change that. We did an assessment a couple years ago, at least to try to get out and even just get a handle on where the steps are, what we have, because we didn't have good records on that. We are trying to chip away at it little by little. I will say that there is a set of steps that is in very good condition because it's brand new. It's in the Hill District on Janilla Street. It's one of the first complete sets of brand new steps that we've done. We have another one coming down the pipeline on the north side connecting up to Vista Street. That one's under design right now, and that'll be a complete brand new set as well. I hope that construction will get underway this fall. We're pushing to make that happen. And beyond that, we're trying to get through the backlog and identify some priorities, and we'll be getting more priorities in the future budget. And there's a lot of work to do, and we're going to do our best to do what we can to prioritize them and try to improve what we can.
Yeah, and if you want to Google Pittsburgh City Steps, the results of the prioritization process are online. They're in a really great map that actually shows some of the vectors that were considered in the planning process, like proximity to school, proximity to transit, and they're actually scored. Each one of those factors is 0 to 10, so you can get a sense of where the steps that are near your house fall into that prioritization. So we're going to hear from Table 6.
Hello, my name is Nina Stahovic. We were talking about the mayor's budget priority about infrastructure as well, about building a 21st century infrastructure that they've deemed important to work on. So our question was, how are decisions made as to what is deemed critical? And how can people raise the criticalness of an issue, especially like water, which is an increasing problem with landslides, with flooding in the South Hills?
Andrew might be able to speak to kind of the planning process. This right now is actually a planning process that we're engaged in, so thanks again for coming out. This is where your voice really counts. But in terms of master planning, Andrew, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So as a part of the city's resilience plan, we did look at kind of what critical infrastructure, so those are things like dealing with infrastructure that we have relative to flooding, relative to stormwater management, and how we do that through, in conjunction with the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority over what are called sewer sheds that we have across the city. So there's planning of trying to understand how we can use either green infrastructure or how we use development. So when development comes through the city, making sure that their stormwater management plans, which are part of what we review, are addressing the stormwater issues, and working with the Water and Sewer Authority to build green infrastructure. For example, in Lawn and Ophelia Park, which is in Oakland, we are working to convert a park space into a green infrastructure site because it is at a low point in that sewer shed, in a place where we see a lot of flooding issues. And another place where we see that, and I know Luann is next to me, and Marcel's next to me as well, is Whiteman Park, which is a project that I know that the Department of Public Works has been working on, in the rehabilitation of that park, really focusing on trying to address stormwater issues and flooding issues. So trying to address the fact that people's basements are flooding because of storm issues through some of these places where we can in the public infrastructure. Anybody else?
My voice is really loud. I think everyone can hear me.
Stand up, my dear.
Hi, I'm Stephanie from Overbrook. I'm the thorn in the side of many. The zoning study that is in the 2019 budget, it's kind of part of our question. If things aren't completed in 2019 that were budgeted, what happens to that $100,000? Is it going to roll over to 2 years from now when Sophia said you guys would have capacity to do the zoning study while there are development happening? It is storage facilities popping up in the flood zone along Sawmill Run Boulevard. Sophia's coming to discuss with us this month. However, it's still frustrating because she did say pretty much the zoning study's happening, it's in the budget, but it won't be for a while. By that time, everybody will have bought up the spaces and filled them with concrete.
Sure, and for those who don't know, Sophie is one of the neighborhood planners in the Department of City Planning, so we have neighborhood planners that work across the city in specific geographical areas, and the study that you're speaking of is one that was in, like you said, in the 2019 capital budget for both zoning and open space in kind of the Sawmill Run corridor, so looking at things like the seldom seen Greenway, looking at other properties that we have in that corridor. We've also been waiting for some PWSA work to conclude that they've been doing with Economic Development South relative to flooding issues and relative to the run. And as some people may know, and it's been about 15 years, but we've gone as far as actually buying streets, through federal government funding, buying streets out, where that have been at a severe concern for loss of life risk for flooding. So the answer to the more specific answer to your question as to when that will happen, I think, is what we're trying to figure out. But those capital budget dollars, are something that do allow us to do that project over multiple years. So if it's not something that starts immediately, it is something that, it is our intention to get to over the next year, and that we would be able to use those funds to do that. Does that answer?
Yes, so the $1 million for Glenberry Street and the $100,000 for the zoning study will still be there whenever it happens.
I'm less familiar with the $1 million, but for the $100,000 for the zoning study, since that's in city planning's budget, I can tell you that if that project kind of moves into 2020, that we'll still be able to utilize those funds, and that still will be a project that we work on.
Yeah, the funds will roll over year for capital. We do a check every year for any funds that are 3 years old or older that maybe the project's not needed anymore. We have the option to sweep them, but council's never taken that option. They've always renewed the project so that we can continue working on it. Next, we're going to hear from Table 5.
So we were talking about a few issues with mobility and transportation in the city. And I was unaware that the county has most of the control over the public transportation through the buses. I learned that today. If that's not correct, just let me know. But so we were curious in what ways the city is planning to improve transportation, like in what ways can they improve it, like beyond the restriction of having the county being in control of the buses. Like can they distribute more bus passes to people who don't have access to the buses? We talked about the bike lanes, how it seems like there's really good coverage in sort of segmented areas of the city. Like I live in Bloomfield, there's a really nice bike lane that gets disconnected on routes to other parts of town. We also talked about how the sidewalks are pretty rough in a lot of parts of town. Like on Carson Street, there are a lot of unfinished sidewalks, and we know that that's kind of the responsibility of the property owners, but we're curious if the city can do anything to improve that, any of those three things, so the public transportation, the biking, or the sidewalks.
So for sidewalks, we've had a number of great discussions. Even today, Eric and I were in a meeting talking about what we can do about privately owned sidewalks. Director Kennedy can probably speak to more detail about the challenges involved in that, because as you identified, they're privately owned, and it's tough for the city to kind of get into that in terms of renovating them. And then for planning, Eric, I don't know if you want to speak to some of the neighborhood transportation planning we've done, the corridor studies that we're looking to do in the Hill District that we've done in the Strip District. We just had the procurement for that as well. The Port Authority, I can talk about some. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, so one way that, to your question of how the city involves the transit, the transit authority, since it is a county authority, relative to changes in the system. So as a part of city planning, we have a neighborhood planning program. So we are working in neighborhoods right now. We're working in Homewood, Hazelwood, and Manchester Chateau, and are looking to begin work in the Hill District and in Oakland in conjunction with DOMI. And in that, we're, the 4 topics that we look at are community development, mobility, and infrastructure. And so in the mobility conversation, that is something that, city planning, DOMI, and the Port Authority are all leading those discussions with community members and doing the analysis together to try to figure out what types of improvement that we want to see into the future. And then, Eric, I don't know if you want to talk about some of the more immediate.
Yeah, so let me think. On the bike infrastructure is something you mentioned, and I think we've hit a lot of the really easy stuff, and we've got some lanes out there, and we're kind of getting into the next wave. We know we need to connect up some of the disconnected segments and move into other neighborhoods where it's a little more challenging, so we haven't done as much yet. 2 things that were alluded to that are going on right now is a corridor study through the Strip District and one in the Hill District. And they're looking at all modes of transportation. For example, the Strip District is a very long, narrow district. It has a couple primary streets that run through. You gotta get cars through there, you gotta get buses, people, bikes, pedestrians, bikes. So how do you take limited right-of-way and apportion it to meet all those needs? So that's something that we're looking at, and with the goal of being able to provide a connection from downtown through to the places where, for example, up in Bloomfield. Yeah.
Did y'all think about, or do y'all have any plans for that corridor, sort of like along the river? There's like the Allegheny Trail, and then the bike lane gets cut off there. I'm just curious if there's anything planned for that.
So that trail is partially closed right now because of the development that's going on back there. It is a goal to have that connect all the way up through to Lawrenceville. I believe the Green Boulevard plan speaks to that, which is something that there's been planning done. There's ideas. That's something we still have to work towards implementation on that, because there are some challenges. But there has been a process. There are a lot of ideas out there that is something that we see there's value as a connection.
I just wanted to add something in relation to transportation, amenities, and development. So one way that we work with city planning and DOMI on advancing transportation projects in the city is looking at how we can leverage private investment through tools like TIF, which is a tax diversion program, and fund public transportation amenities. So we've done that in East Liberty by building a TOD site with the new East Liberty Transit Center. Way back in the day, we leveraged the private investment generated on the PNC First site development and used that funding to build the First Avenue T station. So there are ways for us to work with our other city agencies when they identify needed transportation amenities in the city and leverage private investment to start the process for funding the capital stack. And what we do is when we identify a development where we can divert future taxes to pay down an upfront loan to make that project happen, we can also use that local money and see if we can leverage state and federal dollars. So that's something that we work together on.
So we'll talk about sidewalks.
Hi, and just to address the sidewalk piece, it's obviously a multi-jurisdictional issue here. So you're correct in saying that the sidewalk is a responsibility of the owner. And I would just encourage you to call 311. We take these types of complaints very seriously. It's a real accessibility concern. We go out and site, and while, we don't have a 100% success record, we have a very high success record. It's just under 80% in terms of getting someone to actually comply with your violation. So please give us a call. We do try to be proactive. We do about 60,000 plus inspections a year just for property maintenance and other types of issues. So, you can track your complaint on 311. Wendy and her colleagues are terrific over there. And we also have a map called Building Eye where you can actually set up alerts. Say you're concerned about sidewalk issues in your neighborhood. You can actually get an alert to be proactively emailed every time that there's an issue like that popping up. So let us know. Again, we try to be proactive, but we really appreciate citizens, customers letting us know where there are issues so we can work with you to address it. So thank you.
All right, next we're going to hear from table 4.
Sorry, and I think there's one more sidewalk.
So, in addition to if there are private sidewalks that are in bad condition, trying to get those fixed, DOMI is also looking at where there are like critical sidewalk gaps, where if there's a large area where there's a need for a pedestrian-friendly path and there's something doesn't exist. We're still working through making sure that it works within city code, but we're trying to do that. We have some money available that I think we're going to target, some of the community development block grant eligible areas, and we're going to try to do some a block long stretch if we've identified a place where there's a need. We haven't done anything yet, but we have the first 2 projects that we have identified. One is in Homewood, and one is in the Hill District. It could be that the sidewalk never existed, or it's just in such horrible condition, and not just like a single property has kind of let their sidewalk go bad, but just there's a very long stretch where there's minimal to no sidewalk. So that's something where we're attempting to look at a block or a couple block long area and do a little investment that way.
And just to build on that, and what Director Kennedy said as well, the vast majority of what we have in the budget has a specific geographic location. That's a huge transparency issue for us. That's an accountability issue for us. If you go to the Complete Streets project page, though, there's a couple items. Traffic calming is one, and critical sidewalk gaps is another, where there's not a specific location because we need the input from 311, from the council offices to help build that project list. So if you see something, feel free to get at 311. That really is informing the decisions that the project managers are making in DOMI.
Just have one more comment about sidewalks. At the URA, a number of the housing programs, while we don't have a specific program to help you repair your sidewalks, if you are rehabbing your home through one of our programs, that is certainly an eligible activity to fund through some of the housing programs at the URA. Now, most of those are income restricted to households below 80% of area median income.
I guess it's not the last question. Yeah. And I'll add with the sidewalks. For sidewalks that are owned by business, we have a facade improvement program that provides dollar-for-dollar grant funds matching to the business that they can use to fix the sidewalk or anything, considered a facade of the building. So, if they are related to the business, we can work with them to get monies to them for that.
We're going to move to table 4, but related to that, there's also the One Step Up program. So if you get a chance, you can Google the URA's One Step Up program.
So, hi, I'm Elisa. I live in Uptown. You'll forgive me for not standing. So I have one statement and one question. The statement is, looking at this list of priorities, they're all excellent priorities. I would like to see accessibility as an actual stated priority, both because everyone benefits from making things accessible. Everyone can go up a ramp, whether you use wheels or not. But also it's a money saver because there's a number of projects that have happened, including, at least 2 sections of protected bike lane where they put up bollards that then the city had to pay to take down again because it either didn't let the bus get close to a stop or didn't let paratransit vehicles put in. So I think it should be an actual stated thing in the list rather than just, everyone should be, yeah. My question then is that, a number of these projects that are done, a lot of the focus is on bringing in new infrastructure without A, trying to bolster existing infrastructure, but B, without taking into account how it's going to adversely impact the lives of people in those neighborhoods. You know, I'm thinking of how when they built, you know, Children's Hospital was a huge infrastructure thing, and Lawrenceville, overnight, the existent neighborhood population was basically taxed out of their homes. I live in Uptown, and that's going to happen now with the expansion of Mercy Hospital. What can be done and what is being done to ensure that the city is being improved for its current residents rather than who they want to see as residents?
So Andrew's going to speak to the planning process, especially, you know, private development's especially sensitive.
Sure. So when I spoke about the neighborhood planning process or program a little bit earlier, the 4 locations that we have worked through the first phase of the neighborhood planning program in Uptown, in Homewood, in Hazelwood, and in Chateau Manchester were all chosen because they were locations that either because of the market value analysis that the URA has done, that, you know, they were, you know, essentially weak markets that were adjacent to strong markets, and we could see development coming there into the future, or they were where catalytic investment, you know, such as the bus rapid transit in Uptown or Hazelwood Green and Hazelwood, would then start to change the neighborhood. And the idea with the neighborhood planning program and working in those neighborhoods was really to try to understand the vision and the priority of the neighborhood before development happened, so that when things like the Vision Rehab Hospital in Uptown happened, that when we were working through the development review on that, and DOMI was working through the transportation review on that for their development, that we were getting, we were exacting out of them things that were in line with the community's vision. And so, whether that was, better sidewalk and connections as part of their development, whether that was green infrastructure and trees that are happening not only on their site but off of their site into the neighborhood, or whether that was, improvements and connections to district energy that, that then had a broader benefit beyond just to, in this case, UPMC. The idea was that, whether it's the Vision Rehab Hospital or whether it's other developments that happen, that we're setting forth the development regulations, and when the development comes, that we're then working to align those developments with the priorities of the community through those neighborhood planning efforts.
Let me just ask, when you say that you're working with the community, for example, I live in Uptown, as I said, and we have Uptown Partners, which is where I see a lot of the city getting, a place that the city is getting a lot of information from, but it doesn't, Uptown Partners is predominantly white owners who live outside the neighborhood who rent out to people who live in Uptown, as opposed to actually being residents of Uptown. Like, is there adequate work being done to actually talk to the actual residents? I think of our area, most of my neighbors wouldn't have found out about this because half my neighborhood's too poor for internet access. So, what's being done to make sure that the actual neighborhood residents who are going to be most hurt or affected by this are actually finding out about it?
Oh, sure. The Uptown Plan was passed in 2017. The other 3 that I talked about are ones that are going on now. But as far as, whether that is participation in community meetings where we are doing mailers to all addresses in those neighborhoods, from that to participation in action teams, which are kind of groups of residents that are working through the chapters of the plan. The intention is to make sure that we are maximizing community engagement through this neighborhood planning process, whether a neighborhood plan process or a planning process otherwise. And the Department of City Planning, at the end of last year, beginning of this year, had a working group that was working on creating a public engagement guide for how we look at public engagement in the future, not only on planning projects, but as we're thinking about these kind of long-term projects, that there's an understanding of what engagement means and what, and being kind of, being open about, all right, well, you may not be able to make every decision, but we want to make sure that whether it's that you're consulting in the right way or that you're informed in the right way, that we're making sure to do that, in conjunction with, our residents and other stakeholders.
Just something to add to that as well, to the public engagement guide that Andrew was talking about, making sure that we're doing it equitably as well. So thinking about, who isn't able to attend community meetings. Is it because there isn't childcare or food, or the actual physical place isn't accessible? Are we thinking about how people communicate? So that's also a part of the work that we're doing to ensure that as we do community processes, not just in planning, but across the city, that it's standardized and we're thinking about it from an equitable lens. So thank you for bringing that up.
Next, we're going to hear from table 3.
Hi, my name's Elena. I live in Mount Washington. Our question in general, we found when we were talking at our table that we all had very specific projects that we were thinking of in our neighborhoods, and we were having a harder time thinking citywide. Like some of the other things, like Port Authority is a citywide issue. We were more like, we need this and we need that. So how we wrap this into our question is based around the equity priority that is already stated. I personally feel that every neighborhood in the city probably thinks they're not getting their fair share of public dollars. Like I said, I live in Mount Washington. We have a laundry list of things we'd like to see. However, we're probably viewed as a neighborhood that's doing pretty okay. So what current practices are already in place to make sure that services and dollars are spent equitably across the city? And also, like, Dave started to talk about it, but how do we better communicate that so that people don't think they're getting nothing when they are getting something?
Oh, good question. That's one of those questions we deal with almost daily, probably weekly. In our job, Bill can probably speak to the uniqueness of the 9 council districts, but when you consider 90 neighborhoods, they're just different, and they have different needs. They have different populations, different levels of density. Some people move to a place that's less dense because they like it quiet. Some people move to a place that's more dense because they need to be connected to transit. They want those amenities nearby. So, Bill?
Yeah, I think you have, as Dave was talking about, the uniqueness of every neighborhood, so there's needs they're going to come up, and I think you have a staff here that's trying to do their best to deliver those services on an equitable level. However, there are some times when things can't be done equitably. And as you know from Mount Washington, where I live in Duquesne Heights, I'm up there too, we're one landslide away, and I think Mara and all these people can talk about 2018 when a lot of budgets went belly up to fix a couple of the landslides across the city between what happened over on Greenleaf Street and a couple on the north side and East End as well too, McCardle. Yeah, so there's always these other things that creep into the budget. So if you looked at the map and saw where money was spent, you might see more money actually spent in Mount Washington. And it kept us away from doing some of those other projects that might have been more equitable. And that's where we go into some of the priority needs. And first, is there an immediate threat level? So when choosing some of these projects, that's got to be thought of too. And sometimes it's not equitable because one area may have a higher threat level area that is also going to be a project that's going to cost a bit more money. But on a whole, I think we do our best by getting that input from all the folks. We need to improve, obviously. But we're doing our best to be able to try to make sure that all services are handed out equally and equitably across the city.
And
More like specific practices. Like, I understand there's different priority. Hi, again. I understand there's priority set, and they can be fluid. They can change, right? And I heard people speak about like, oh, well, we did this, and when this is how we looked into it. Then we prioritized the steps. And I've been a part of a lot of these things because I serve on our Community Development Corporation. But I guess I was trying to get insight into like, what does it really look like practice-wise to say like, hey, let's take these dollars. Do we divide it out among department, then to district level? Do we actually look at neighborhoods? I was just trying to get a little bit more of the insight into how, like, I know we listen to the public and we do these things, but then what?
so there's there's kind of
the 1-2s, and I think URA may be able to address this a little bit better than me, but one of the issues that comes up was housing, and we did do the Affordable Housing Task Force and put $10 million annually into that. So that's one of the issues where we're trying to get the equity out to the folks that really need it. And that covers through the whole city. It's not just in extremely low-income areas. It's also to help deal with gentrification, help with lower-income folks that may be in Mount Washington, maybe in Duquesne Heights, maybe on Grandview Avenue. So, there's some income-based programs that work that way as well, too. I'll hand it off to Andrew.
Sure. So just to build off what Bill was saying, there are things like the Affordable Housing Task Force that the city convened, city planning staff with the URA and others, that are now leading to things that the URA are doing around the Housing Opportunity Fund, that we're doing around working with council offices to create inclusionary zoning regulations that are all kind of working towards a larger goal citywide. Another example would be the city about 5 years ago did an open space plan for all of its open space and parks, looking at doing an analysis of making sure that residents are within a 10-minute walk to a park, and looking at where we needed to focus, what recommendations there were for individual parks. And so then, city planning has completed work on Southside Park on creating a master plan, and then has worked with Department of Public Works that is presently working through engineering of the first phase of that project with the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority. That so that that we're planning. So there are some things that are working around kind of systems planning, and then you'll see either budgets for master planning, or budgets for engineering, or budgets for construction, or programming that will work with our with city parks, that are all kind of coming from those kind of system those thoughts about how we look at these things as a system across the city, and how we make sure that we try to understand what those different types of investment are that different places need.
Yeah, so the planning process helps us decide where the assets should be in terms of upkeep and maintaining the assets. They go through that scoring criteria with the capital budget process. Next, we're going to hear from George in table 2.
I'm George Danko from Regent Square, and our group spanned Mount Washington, Brookline, Point Breeze, and my own neighborhood. In our discussions about our concerns for the way the city is going and directions it's taking, the issue of transparency came up. So our question is, given the importance of transparency in governing, how is the city communicating back to the residents of the scoring and the prioritization of capital projects?
Yeah, budget question. So we have a summary of how the capital budget process works. Some of it was covered tonight, but it's also written in the budget. I think in the council edition, I got moved towards the back as an appendix. That has details about even the results of these meetings from last year. You can go and see the executive summary of what people said to us this time last year in these 2 meetings. So that's really important to us. The other thing is new for 2019's budget, the budget that's on your table. We added 2 appendices in the back. One is a list of all of the proposals that we received. I think there was 485, I'm looking at Brendan, for like $175 million, well beyond what we could possibly fund. But we wanted to put every proposal in a list, in an appendix, in the budget, and show out of the people who were scoring on this capital program facilitation committee, how many of us had that in their proposed budget? So that's the first report. The second report was for everything that did not get funded in the budget. We added what's called an alternative funding plan. That was our assessment of where else they might be able to get funding for that project. So maybe it's a grant opportunity, or maybe it's a project that is really a puzzle piece to a neighborhood that needs a master plan first. And so maybe we have a note in there that says pending master plan for the Hill District. For us, that was really important. That wasn't anything that really came from anywhere. That was just something we wanted to do to increase transparency in the capital budget.
Just to drill down on that. To drill down on that a little bit, I think our question is really, so we're in the June part with these forums, but when the facilitation committee meets, it seems like they have an outsized ownership of responsibility to do scoring, which can be subjective. So in the transparency vein, how is scoring being communicated back to taxpayers in terms of what's important and what's not, just so that feedback loop continues to be clear for folks?
So we don't have the, mostly for space constraints, we don't have the per proposal scoring published anywhere. Also, we have differences in how we scale things from person to person on the Capital Program Facilitation Committee. So while somebody may have all 10s and all 1s, myself, I may have some projects that were 3s or some projects that were 6s in certain categories. So we do our best in terms of publishing what the criteria are that we are scoring, and we also publish what each one of us has in our proposed budget. But it's important to keep in mind that we're only making recommendations to elected officials. Ultimately, the decisions are made by the mayor in the mayor's preliminary budget, and then the mayor's kind of state of the city final budget in November. And then city council spends a month doing televised hearings with all of the departments, and they sometimes come up with new projects that were not considered as proposals before. Sometimes they bring something up that may not have scored so well. So at the end of the day, don't be too afraid of what we're doing, because we're making recommendations that ultimately it's up to the elected officials to make the decisions. Table 1.
We're the deep state.
Hi, my name is Ellen. At our table, we discussed a lot about equity, and so we understand that there has been an Office of Equity created and a Chief Equity Officer has been hired. So we're wondering how each of your departments are going to work to integrate equity into your projects, programs, and funding.
Well, thank you so much for bringing that up. So the Office of Equity, just for the room, was created in the last month or so to really think about how we're thinking and intentionally including equity in our work, not just internally about hiring, promotions, things like that, but also externally about how the city works to make it more equitable in our practices, programs, and procedures. How the Office of Equity will work is there are managers within it that deal with certain subject matter experts. So it ranges from critical communities that deals with people who are experiencing homelessness, veterans, drug use. It ranges from early childhood initiatives, small business development, business procurement, so thinking about how we contract as a city, welcoming Pittsburgh as well as under that umbrella, so thinking about our new citizens, migrants and refugees, making sure that the city continues to be accessible and welcoming to those populations, as well as, I don't want to miss anyone. I think that's everyone. So that office is headed by Majestic Lane. He's the Chief Equity Officer. And what the Office of Equity will look like is for each department, working with GARE, which is the Government Alliance on Racial Equity. They're the honestly premier organization that works with different municipalities across the country to help them get like specific metrics and measures for what equity looks like. So not just like, you should be more diverse, you should think more about this, but what are the specific numbers and ways that you can make your city and your city programs more equitable. We've partnered with them. The URA is also a partner as well with GARE, and we're working on with each department how we can put those measures and metrics in ways that make sense for those groups. So for each department, they'll be able to work with the Office of Equity to kind of understand for their procedures and processes what equity looks like and where they can improve, so that it's not just, again, equity as a warm, fuzzy feeling, but a tangible, here's what we can do to improve our services and make Pittsburgh more equitable for all.
We've also worked with city planning, with DPW on mapping our assets, so we have a better understanding of how things overlay. So what is the condition of our roads, and how does that overlay with low-income communities, right? That's something that's been really important to us. About a year and a half ago, 2 years, we got onto an asset management system called Cartograph. That's been amazing. It's been so great to have a dashboard and see where everything is and be able to drill down and see asset history and the work that's been on it, but also to pull back and get that full city view and see where the condition of our assets, like the step map that we have that's color-coded, and how does that align with incomes in different neighborhoods. So, lightning round, we have about 15 minutes left. Does anybody have a second question that we can do kind of quickly?
Oh, hello.
I've been very impressed by how many of our tables have similar themes to our questions, but I have a pretty broad question. As we're considering our city's climate resiliency plan, and I'm thinking about issues of equity and issues of housing and even landslides and flooding, are we thinking about zoning changes that might increase urban density in the city of Pittsburgh?
That's a city planning question if I ever heard
I
one.
was going to say, as a result of the work that we did in Uptown, for example, we did change the zoning in that neighborhood. So in the other neighborhoods that we're working on neighborhood plans on, the idea is that we are changing development regulations to fit the vision of those places. And in Uptown, one of the things that they said was that there were lots of things that they were very concerned about as a part of the eco-innovation district planning, that they wanted better stormwater regulations than we had on the books. They wanted buildings to be more energy efficient, or they wanted them to be connected to district energy. They were saying, we want to protect some of the historic structures that we have, and those are things that we can't necessarily do. We can't force an applicant, a property owner, a developer to do that work. But what we can do is incentivize those as benefits for them to build higher. And so in the case of Uptown, what happened was, we saw those as goals through the planning that existed, and we changed the development regulations to incentivize those things to have people build at a greater density. And another example would be, just last year, we had new zoning approved for all 35 miles of our riverfronts. And so, similar idea where, we allowed, a base entitlement for people to do, and then if people wanted to build either closer to the river or if they wanted to build higher, that they had to do things that were in prior riverfront plans as important to the city and its residents. So whether that is the certain types of amenities that they built as trails or other restrooms or other things along the riverfront, whether that was, again, stormwater management or affordable housing, or looking at some of these other things that were really values that the city and its residents had put forth in plans that we were allowing for greater density. And as we're looking at our neighborhood plans, we're looking at the goals that are set forth in the climate action plan, which are citywide goals, and trying to understand through that process how each neighborhood is then striving to get to those goals. I mean, if we are getting to, reducing emissions by 50% by 2030, we have to think about how our transportation system works, how we're incentivizing and encouraging density around high capacity transit, and how we are, better utilizing, development to get the things that we want relative to that.
All right, table 4.
Yes, my name is Rick. I'm from Brookline, lifelong resident here, a city of Pittsburgh in the South Hills. And all our neighborhoods have a large list of needs. It's actually endless. However, one of the big problems that I see is that some people are not paying their fair share. And what I mean by that is we have a large number of nonprofits. Big business gets a lot of support from the city, and I'm all for bringing business and new people into the city. However, a lot of our residential neighborhoods are in decline. And the only way I can see that we're going to get enough resources is if we put pressure on people to pay more. And I'm specifically talking about the nonprofits in this town. They don't pay property taxes, real estate transfer taxes, and in many instances, their executives don't pay a wage tax that all the city residents are required to pay. If I'm mistaken, please correct me. But as I understand it, that's the situation. So my question is, what can the city do to put pressure on the people that are getting a pretty good deal doing their business here in the city and help the residential neighborhoods with their needs?
Thank you. So your question is a CURA question?
So the good news is that your question, which is very valid. I wish we had more money for the capital budget, for the operating budget, is recorded. It's something that we can share with the departments. Unfortunately, we don't have anybody in the room or in the panel that really deals with that side of the house in terms of raising tax revenue. I will say that the URA has done some creative things in terms of incentivizing business growth, which does expand the tax base. So Sheila, I don't know if you want to talk about any of the business attraction programs, or Josh.
Yeah, Josh can speak to the business attraction programs. I mean, I will comment on some of the programs that we utilize to build public infrastructure related to new development. And you're exactly right that developers who are able to pay taxes should pay taxes. I can only speak to developers at this point, but not to the nonprofit developers. But in order to utilize those tax diversion programs, a developer has to pay 100% of their taxes. Now, tax abatements are another matter. There are tax abatement programs available in the city, and those are provided by right. There are a few programs with the county and the school district, and I believe that those are not by right, that those are underwritten and evaluated on a per project basis. So that's one way we can look critically at the way we utilize tax breaks and abatements. So my belief is that they should be underwritten and not given away.
And from the business expansion attraction side, you know, we work primarily with for-profit businesses. I mean, we do, you know, talk to and have conversations with nonprofits, but, you know, 99% of the time when we're lending to a business, when we're lending to an organization, they're for-profit, they're hiring new people, they're growing the tax base here in the city, and that's our goal, is to, you know, create new jobs and create new taxes for the city. So, I mean, that's our primary focus anytime we are having conversations with a developer or a new business that's, you know, either growing or expanding here in the city.
There will be, at the end of the survey, a space to tell us what you think we should have these style of meetings about in the future, and that's a great opportunity to write that. I would like to go to that meeting, so I hope that we have it someday.
Hi, there is $14 million from the state in the budget for LED lights to replace all of our existing city lights. LED lights are kind of harsh, and people that have put them in at the car lots as independent businesses, it feels like there's car headlights high beaming into my windows, and I've been trying to get this resolved, blah, blah, blah. But I'm worried that this isn't on the radar of the city because I've not seen anything regarding light pollution. There is an ordinance, but I don't know if it applies or who it applies to. But the LED lights is a concern as far as harsh lighting on our neighborhood streets.
I am intimately familiar with that project. I will say that we are extremely aware of that issue, some call it blue light. It feels disruptive to people, so the selection of the fixture is going to be a planning process in and of itself. So that's definitely something where we're going to be out in communities talking to that point exactly. In the meantime, there's a connectivity issue that we need to have an internet connection with each and every light that helps us turn it on and off. It helps us flash it in case of an emergency. We're still trying to figure out how to get the internet to every light. That's kind of a complicated process right now, and it also pertains to some of our agreements with Comcast and Verizon. So there's a lot of things we need to sort out first, but we will be coming out to the community to talk specifically about fixture selection. Yeah.
Every once in a while, I've heard that Pittsburgh's considered a second-class city, not a first-class city like Philadelphia, and I understand that prevents us from doing certain things like passing legislation around Airbnbs and things like that. Does that affect what you guys do? Like, is there some way that you're handicapped because we're the second-class city instead of a first-class city? And is there ever a hope in hell that might change?
Bill, do you want to speak to our status as a city of the second class?
So you're right that there's some litigation around our regulation of rental properties. So in 2014, City Council and the mayor passed rental registration. This is a large business activity that's happening in our neighborhoods that could have disruptive impact. It could make some substandard living conditions for some of our residents here in Pittsburgh. And we want to regulate that like any other business here in Pittsburgh. We regulate 17 types of business activities. So we are the only major city in Pennsylvania that does not have this legislation. So we did pass this in 2014. We have been sued. It's been in litigation now for 5 years. We have won on all of the constitutional issues which you've raised regarding whether we can regulate commerce like this. Commonwealth Court is very clear that we can. So now we're down to some sort of nuts and bolt issues. So we are looking to regulate longer term rentals. There hasn't been any talk about some of the short term rentals. But, I agree. On the more global conversation, you're right. We are a second class city under state legislation, and it absolutely regulates how we can regulate commerce and other types of business activities. It's, I think, a real frustration for many departments here. Just another issue as it relates to permits, licenses, and inspections. The state sets our building codes. So how you can build in terms of lots of density issues, in terms of environmental issues. Pittsburgh was forced to be on the 2009 building codes for many years. We were just able to move to the 2015 codes, but Philly gets to be on the 2018 codes. So that's, when you think about 30% of all environmental pollution is being caused by buildings, that has a real impact here.
So who says that we have to stay as a second-class city? How do we grow to a first-class city? Is it our population? Do we have to include Fox Chapel and
Does someone else want to take that part of it? Do you want to take that
a little bit? Yeah, this is state law. So Philadelphia is off on its own. Philadelphia is actually both a city and a county combined. It's a unique situation. Pittsburgh didn't take that track when we were created, so we're sort of stuck in this second-class city code. But we're the only one. Everyone else, I think there's a couple second-class city A's. Scranton, Reading, Erie. Is it just Scranton is A? Okay. But, yeah. Yeah, but the Electric City, right? But I don't know as if we can change that as a city, but what we can do is we can, as issues come up, we can begin to lobby the state representatives. And if the mayor's office was here, they can talk about some of those things that we're doing. It does hamper us on a lot of different... No, I'm sorry. I meant... I really apologize. But I'll give it to you.
From the wings, I'm told by operating budget analyst Patrick Cornell that the minimum is 1 million people for first-class city.
Yeah. We're not. We were built for 1 million people, I think, initially, but we never really made it there. We're about 600,000.
All right, time for one more question.
So this is kind of both for city planning and URA, I think. A lot of what's being done, in a lot of neighborhoods for, building up, more higher occupancy buildings and whatnot. There's a lot of housing that's being torn down, and in its place is all these luxury high rises. What are you guys doing to make sure that there's also regular income high rises being built? When I was moving, I couldn't find a place that I could live in that would meet my budget, because you have a lot of people with disabilities who can only live in these high rises because they're built to be super accessible, but at the same time they're also super unaffordable. And so, I lived in a walk-up for a long time. I had to carry my walker up and down the stairs. Like, what's being done for that?
Well, we do, we are trying to build certainly affordable housing throughout the city. So it is important to add to the supply, because there is a shortage of affordable units, as you point out. A lot of the new development that you see in some of the neighborhoods is actually, it's really not being financed by the URA. There's a lot of, with the changes in the economy, most of that high-rise development in some of the East End neighborhoods is actually 100% privately financed. But you do bring up a good point, and I think with we want to thank the city for the Housing Opportunity Fund, because I think that will make more projects happen. But still, we're reliant on resources like low-income housing tax credits, which is it's a federal resource that's allocated by the states. And right now, there's great projects throughout the state that can't get funded because there isn't enough credits. So it's important to lobby for those additional resources. And then it's also important to keep the housing stock that we do have. We have approximately 15,000 deed-restricted affordable housing units within the city, so they have to be rented at affordable rents to low-income residents, and it's really important that we keep that resource. So we are working to do that. We are working to understand what that inventory is and how we keep those units affordable on a permanent basis.
And Tom's kind of underselling, I think, some of the things that the URA do around affordable housing. I mean, I know that, we're involved with the URA on things that, whether it's directive from the URA or directive from the mayor or both, that, when, there are a number of properties that, the URA is putting out to bid for developers and, and is really pushing for affordability to be a part of that. As a part of the Affordable Housing Task Force that the mayor convened, the city is now working on a pilot inclusionary zoning ordinance in Lawrenceville, which is requiring that buildings of 20 units or greater that are being built across, in the Lawrenceville neighborhoods do have to provide 10% of those units as affordable if they're rental to 50% of the area median income or below. And not in the legislation that we've done so far, but that doesn't mean that that's not something that we can't look into. And so what we're seeing is just even doing mandatory inclusionary zoning in the three Lawrenceville neighborhoods of the city, that we're seeing development that's going on in the south side, or we're seeing development that's going on in East Liberty, where developers are actually providing affordable units on their own without that requirement. And so, so that although you don't see it often, it is starting to happen. And so in addition to to all the work that the URA does around production, we are starting to see some developments in the city that are doing that. Either are looking into it because they have to, because there are mandatory inclusionary requirements coming. They're doing it because we talked about in some places where we have it as an incentive, where people are doing it so they can get greater height. And then there are some places where they're honestly doing it on their own, and we appreciate and love that. So yeah.
That's a great question to wrap up on. Thank you to the panel. I really appreciate everybody coming out tonight and sharing your years of knowledge. You can cheat and get a cookie first. So if you had a question that didn't get answered tonight, don't worry. There's other ways to keep the conversation going. On each of your tables, there's a little tax receipt that's from Balancing Act, a project that we worked on to get greater transparency and understanding out to the public in terms of how your tax dollars are spent. You can put in your exact salary, your exact property value, and get an itemized receipt that represents roughly how your tax dollars are distributed between different departments and projects. Also, you can always email us at cip@pittsburghpa.gov. Your council office is a great resource. You can talk to them about any of the issues that you're seeing in your neighborhood. Of course, feel free to reach out to Wendy's team at 311. Again, they're kind of our first line communication on a lot of capital issues, so please use that. They have a Twitter account. You can check out Bird's Eye View for capital projects happening in your neighborhood, and also the MyBurg app has an opportunity to let us know about issues going on in your neighborhood. Thank yous. I have to say again, thank you to Nina Esposito. I think I saw Billy Heilman here earlier from PFT. Can we please give them a round for letting us use this space? This was really great. I also want to say thank you to all of the moderators, their volunteers, and they really help guide the discussion to hopefully a very fruitful place. So please give it up for the moderators. Most importantly, thank you for everybody for coming out. This is a huge win for us to get the information from you in terms of how you want to shape the 2020 budget. So please give yourselves a round of applause. The good news is it's survey time. You should have a survey on your desk. Be sure to drop that off on your way out. The better news is there's cookies by the door as well. Have a good night. Thank you, everybody.